a minute or two before we dive into it. I suggest we get started. We've got a lot to cover today. I'm really excited about hearing and seeing all the presentations and getting familiar with what's happening. So this day number 4 of Win Week, our Win Network meeting. And so happy to be here with you. I'll be one of the facilitators. It's a privilege and honor to welcome you to the Win Network meeting. So Win Week is really a place to connect, be in community, as well as to create space for reflection together, share experiences, and deepen relationships. And I hope that during some of the time together, we'll be able to do some of that. I already feel like, even though I haven't met you in person, that I'm so familiar with so many people here, and I hope that you feel a part of that community. But more than just building community, it's also to take action and learn about the network priorities, projects, and activities, and how we can advance our collective work. So this is an opportunity to come together to explore long-term renewal and how we can heal through adversity, as well as secure legacies of well-being and justice for generations to come. So those are some of the things we'll be thinking about as we move forward together in community. I'm Louisa Mancy, and I'm connecting from Georgetown, Guyana. It's wonderful to be here with you. Hopefully my internet stays good and my connection seems to be doing well so far, although my neighbor is doing a little work, so please forgive any background noises. I am the Youth of Solutions Program Manager. So I'm a part of the We in the World team, and I'll be facilitating, I'll be in the chat, connecting with you. I want to also introduce Marquez.
Yes. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm really happy to be here today. My name is Marquez Frazier, and I'm with the Community Initiatives team. I'm really happy to be here. And we're also going to invite you all just to share your name, pronouns, and organizations in the chat. And that way we can just sort of start a level of engagement with the group this morning, and just make sure everything logistically is working properly. So again, just your name, your organization, and your pronouns with us via the chat. And while you all are doing that, I can transition to the working agreements just to set context for today. And so again, just thank you, Louisa, for getting us started on time. We understand how valuable time is, and so we really appreciate the fact that you all have decided to join us today, and we want to honor that. And so we're also going to ask that when possible, please turn on your cameras. It just makes it sort of easier to present in this virtual space. I know that we perhaps have Zoom fatigue from time to time, but it does just make things a little easier from a facilitation standpoint and an engagement standpoint to be able to see your smiley faces. And so we really appreciate that. Another thing that we just sort of offer for consideration is to share airtime. Sometimes as we get into conversations, we might be very opinionated and very passionate about our point of views, and those are good, but we just want to create space just for others to share. And sometimes it takes introverts a little bit of time to sort of think and then respond, whereas extroverts can sometimes sort of talk and think at the same time. And so we just want to create space where everyone feels comfortable to share. And also, we also always rather sort of invite people to share comments in the chat. And so collectively, we will be managing the chat conversations for us to be able to respond to those things that are presented there. And so know that that's going on throughout the entirety of our session today. And we always want to test new ideas and take risks. And so this is a safe space for us to learn and grow together. And a part of learning is being a little uncomfortable. And so as things sort of present themselves, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to lean in. And so we invite you all to participate in those ways, being rigorous on ideas, but not on people. And so we understand that we operate from a space of grace, patience, and just gentleness as it relates to one another. And so we want to just uphold those values as we go through the session for today. And above all, and perhaps the most important thing, meet your needs. And so anything that you need to do, again, this is a full day session. So if you need to grab a phone call or grab a cup of coffee or grab tea or water, whatever you may need to do, take a bio break, just please just see this as an opportunity in a safe space to manage in whatever ways you feel comfortable for your own sort of participation level today. And so that's what we have in terms of working agreements. And naturally, if there's anything that we want to add, feel free to add those things to the chat for consideration, or if there are things that you'd like to say, just please let us know. But Louise, I'd like to turn it back over to you if there isn't anything there for the land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Marquez. It's wonderful to see all of the people connecting in the chat. And I know some people mentioned difficulties with connectivity, which is fine. So we wanted to do our land acknowledgement, which is to say that together we acknowledge Indigenous peoples on whose ancient and sacred land we live, work, and play. And as a community, we recognize the ever-present systemic inequities that stem directly from past wrongdoings. And we commit ourselves indefinitely to respecting and reconciling this long history of injustice. So I believe in the chat, there is a link to nativeland.ca, which is, you can go and you can put which area you live and you can find what native land you live on. I think in Guyana, we've been taught that this is the land of 8 tribes, so it's hard to choose one. But you know, it's a long, complex history. We can move to the next slide. We've got this wonderful resource that was shared with us by Elizabeth, which is this gentleman, Joy Hirjo, from his signature project as the 23rd Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry, he conceived the idea of mapping the US with Native Nation poets and poems. And he wants this map to counter damage of false assumptions that Indigenous peoples of our country are often invisible or are not seen as human. You'll not find us fairly represented, if at all, in the cultural storytelling of America, and nearly non-existent in American books of poetry. So I think you can check out his work. He's actually mapped out poems and poets all over the US, so you can probably find people, poets that are close to where you live or where you're from, all over the US. And I believe someone's going to put the link to that chat there for us to have access to this amazing, wonderful resource. So as a part of the reflection for today, we're going to look at a piece of work by Ophelia Cepedia. It's called It's Going to Rain, and the beautiful interpretation, I'm not going to attempt to say it in the Indigenous language, unfortunately, but I will read it for you and then allow some time for us to reflect on the words. And then we'll have the opportunity to go into some, into some groups to discuss what this brings to mind. It is going to rain. Someone said it's going to rain. I think it is not so, because I have not felt the earth and the way it holds still in anticipation. I think it is not so, because I have not yet felt the sky become heavy with moisture of preparation. I think it is not so, because I have not yet felt the winds move with their coolness. I think it is not so, because I have not yet inhaled the sweet yet dirt winds bring. So there is no truth that it will rain. So we want to invite you to join the small groups. I see in the chat that there is a recording of this available if you click that link. So as we go into small groups, we can think about what this poem brings to mind, but also what is calling you towards renewal, and discuss it just for a few minutes with a few people, just to bring us into this space with our hearts and our minds.
And I think everyone's back from breakouts.
Welcome back, everyone. And I hope your session was renewing. I think we're just going to feel free to chat in any thoughts that came up with you that you want to share the rest of the group. I really want to encourage you to have that conversation going. We're just going to look a little bit now at what's going to be happening for the rest of the day.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And so again, as Louisa pointed out, if there are any things, or if there are things that came up in the conversation that you'd like to share with the group, just particularly around what is calling you toward renewal, we certainly invite you to share those in the chat. And so again, I just wanted to underscore Louisa's invitation as we sort of look at that as a theme for today's conversation. But in terms of the agenda for today, we're going to be broken up into two sessions. And so part one is going to be about transforming from within and transforming together. And so starting with that individual and thinking about how the individual fits within the community is essentially the framing for those conversations. And part two is transforming our outcomes, policies, and systems. So thinking about sort of that broader context, or perhaps those upstream sort of context that we all exist within, that broader environment. And so thinking about ways in which we can sort of transform at those levels. And so transformation and renewal, as you all see, are themes for today's conversation. And thank you, Brittany, for your comment in the chat as well. So really appreciate that. And so now I wanted to transition and introduce Shoma and Monty to lead us through this first part of transforming from within. And so Shoma and Monty, would you like to introduce yourselves and kick us off for the day?
Thank you so much, Marquez. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Shoma Shaha. I serve as the executive lead for the Wellbeing in the Nation Network, which is supported in distributed leadership from a number of groups: We in the World, Community Initiatives, Rethink Health, and Institute for People, Place, and Possibility, and many others. And so it's such a privilege to be joined today by one of the people who truly co-leads major initiatives in the WIN network and one of our partners, Monty.
Thanks, Shoma. And yeah, it's a real honor and delight to be with you all today. And so you've met Marquez on our team with Community Initiatives Network, and in a little bit you'll meet Stacy. And it's, we've really enjoyed and are grateful for the opportunity to be working and learning alongside many of you through the WIN network. And I think, Shoma, you have a few slides to kind of share a little bit more context on what we're up to through WIN.
Sure. So, in our work in WIN, we always start with thinking about how do we transform from within, and then based on the understanding, come in proximity to transform together in relationship in a way that shifts who we are to one another, and in a way that gives us a space and understanding to shift our power dynamics. And then on that basis, we shift our outcomes, policies, and systems. Our journey in the WIN network has really come about from all of us reflecting together and changing together. And so this day of dialogue that we hold twice a year with everybody in the WIN network, we have lots of things that we do in cooperatives that are trying to look at a specific thing around creating an equitable economy or racial justice. But this day is always an important time where we come together to take that step back, to reflect ourselves, to reflect in relationship, and then think about what we might do together that we might that really is needed to advance the shared movement for thriving together across generations. So you all can see what the WIN network is about. I can look around the room and think about different roles that many of you play who I'm seeing on the screen in leading different elements of this work. But the idea of a strategic network that's advancing intergenerational well-being and equity on a foundation of racial justice. That's a diverse and growing number of people, organizations, and communities across ages and places. That's both addressing what we need to do today, advancing the vital conditions that everyone needs to thrive, but recognizing the structures and systems and culture that have perpetuated legacies of trauma and exclusion, and transforming those ones to dignity and inclusion as part of how we renew our social contract with one another, how we renew the structures and systems and setup of our society, and create the conditions for everyone to thrive together. Go to the next slide. Now, this is a journey, not a destination, and that's why we take time to take stock as wayfarers on this journey together. And so we're engaged, and we know that these are all big ideas. It's really as we engage in shared learning and shared action that we do this. And our network, because we rely on distributed leadership, as those in the WIN network identify an area that they wish to focus on, they come together and we support them, and they self-organize and lead different areas of work. And you can see some of the areas of work that people are engaged in now. And if you've been at meetings all throughout the week at different WIN gatherings, you've seen them. So if you've been at a different WIN Week event, I invite you to put in something that you learned, that you saw, that really caught you. It could be a word or a phrase or a thought, but something that really caught you at one of those events. And so feel free to put that into the chat today. But I know we had an incredible meeting of the racial justice community looking at the intersection between race and the economy. We had a partners meeting that looked at how we bring our assets together to shift policies and systems. And we had a measurement and learning meeting that begins to apply a racial justice and intergenerational lens to our national measures for well-being and thriving. That truly included a diverse group of people from the grassroots to the grass tops. And in the midst of that, we began to think about how we mobilize our network to advance an equitable response to COVID in the short term that can lean into the true resilience and system change that we need in the long term. So I have to say, as we did that, we were joined by groups that reached thousands, like literally 10,000 artist activists on the ground. And we connected with community residents, and we found ourselves in talking with people who work with Meals on Wheels chapters, reaching older adults, each group sharing what they could do and what they see, what they could bring, what their hopes and aspirations are, and what it would look like to come together. And I just, for me, relationship is renewing, and I felt so rich in the relationships we have and the possibilities those relationships create in creating a more equitable world. And I'm seeing some incredible things in the chat that Anne said that she was thinking together about how to advance belonging and civic muscle, and how to be how strategically responsive the network is. Michelle noted that the spirit of collaboration is so authentic. Thank you. That matters a lot to us. Louisa enjoyed learning about the spaces we live in. Please feel free to keep sharing your thoughts all throughout this. And yes, many of us noted Aaliyah's spoken word piece at the Racial Justice Community meeting. If you missed it, join the Win with Business meeting tomorrow, led by Bobby Milstein and the Rethink team. She will be leading that section off with her spoken word reflections. That she's our resident, our artist in residence at the moment. Next slide. So, when we think about what it means, when these big concepts, we begin to take this into, what does it mean for everyone to be thriving together? This refers to, of course, some of the work we've done and even changing how we understand who's thriving, struggling, and suffering in their measures. But to do that, we need to start with understanding our legacies, like how our society was shaped by legacies, some of dignity and inclusion, others of trauma and exclusion, which leads some people to have all of the vital conditions they need: food, housing, access to meaningful work and wealth, belonging and civic muscle, reliable transportation, access to lifelong learning, all the things, and of course, their basic needs for health and safety. We've seen, though, that in the context of the pandemic and many other stressors, how so many people don't have access to that, and we're set up to do poorly in the context of this pandemic. And because we rely on people, on a system that harms people, that causes trauma, we, instead of creating the conditions that assuring that everyone has those vital conditions, what we tend to do is build reactive adversity-based responses. And have built our whole economy around that, and frankly, much of our culture, and have gotten to a point where we perhaps have developed a narrative of quote unquote the poor, who, in my experience, are some of the most resilient and resourceful people in the world, and expect them to do more, be more, and or don't trust them, and trust those who live in that context. And instead, our ask to you today is, what does it mean when we think about renewal? What does it mean to renew our own understanding and relationship with those who experience the challenges of poverty, racism, and other inequities each and every day? What do they have to offer us, and how can we collectively remove the systems that stand in the way of our mutual learning together? If you go to the next slide, um, we'll talk a little bit about what we've been learning, and even in this 6 months period. And I feel like this slide keeps adapting for me. What we've thought about is that we need to come together in shared stewardship and relationship with one another. We need to know one another, to know one another's stories, even before we can build the trust to share our assets together. um, that right now, so many of us are focused on response, but we need to shift that toward resilience by assuring that everyone has those conditions, that everyone needs to thrive. But if we really are serious about this, if we're thinking about renewal, we can't do renewal if we don't acknowledge those legacies that got us here, if we don't come together in shared relationship and work to change the policies and systems that got us here. If you go to the next slide, if you think about the WIN strategic priorities, they really reflect action across this. So advancing racial justice, advancing a shared movement for thriving together, leveraging the springboard that many of you helped to create as a framework, advancing the WIN measures for equitable recovery and resilience, advancing an equitable economy, advancing mental health and well-being, and addressing COVID inequities and resilience in the context of COVID. Leaning into that as a stress test that can help us create a better system, a new system. And as we, yes, Michelle, it means disrupting, it means dismantling and redoing. I'm in the process of moving this week. And so I have been so steeped over the last several weeks in thinking about what from my past served me well that I want to thank but leave behind, What do I not want to carry into my future at all? That didn't serve me well. And what continues to spark that sense of renewal in me that will come into my future? And how will I create space in my life for renewal? And I think that's the same kind of thing we need to do with our approaches, our organization, our structures, our systems in what we do. If we go to the next slide, one of the things that I kind of had fun to do, Veda, we'll have to share stories along the way. What we begin to do is to think about how these map, if you go back, actually go back a slide, I'm so sorry. If you think about those strategic priorities, go back one more slide. If you think about it, that our priority around addressing racial justice is all about shifting, acknowledging those legacies and shifting to trauma to exclusion. Of course, our advancing that thriving movement together is about coming together in shared stewardship and relationship to chart that path to renewal that will focus on and shift toward those vital conditions. Our work on advancing win measurement, that third strategy, is about that third piece, changing what we measure and how we measure it, and with who gets to define what we measure and how we understand what matters. And as we think about that, we need to shift, of course, the context of our economy from an adversity economy to a well-being economy. And to do that, we'll know whether that we've achieved resilience when our mental health and well-being improves on the basis of all of that. And we're leaning into the COVID response. If you think about this vertical axis in the middle for response to recovery to resilience. So in many ways, the strategic priorities we have come directly from our theory of change and how we can begin to think together. Today, of course, we're going to focus on that priority of renewal. What does that look like? Because most of us, I don't know about you, focus on that day to day, every day. And so how we begin to instead create the space and time to reflect on renewal is something that we're gifting ourselves as a network today. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and friend and brother, Monty.
Thank you for that, Shama. What great context. And maybe just to pick up, the WIN network, well, is a young network, is a network that's really been building on decades of wisdom and experience that have been gained through the healthy, sustainable, equitable communities movement. And little do we know that when we first met in 2019, that several months later, we would start to experience a global pandemic, stark reminders of the endemic of racism, and really the economic downturn that our most vulnerable community members and neighbors were having to shoulder. And so some federal partners actually reached out to us, a couple members in this network, to really ask how we might situate this work, as Shoma suggested, with a larger lens, really understanding the legacies that preceded this work. How do we attend to the most pressing needs, but how might we recover in a way that would really convert loss into renewal? And we start with a premise, I think, not just because of the springboard, that there is an immense reservoir of resilience in American communities that we have the potential to tap into. Some of it is being tapped into around a unifying goal, which is all people and places thriving, no exceptions. And so that's really been leading this work. And many WIN partners have kind of leaned into this piece of 100 contributors and many organizations, thought leaders, and folks that have been on the ground, proximate to communities, and really, again, harnessing their learning. Next slide, please. Shoma did a great job of narrating kind of the WIN theory of change. So I'm going to just go through this really quickly. Yeah, thank you. We can hold these all up. This idea at the center that, of course, a fraction of our population is really thriving. And during these compounding crises, we have growing numbers that are suffering and struggling. Shoma named these vital conditions, and as the work of stewards, our work here, and I think through the WIN network, is really committing ourselves to ensure that we expand the vital conditions so that all people and places can thrive. And Civic Muscle really being at the belonging of how we come together, particularly at the location of place where we're proximate to one another. But the piece that I'll just kind of double click on, as you can see on the right hand side there, is really understanding. I appreciated Michelle's chat in there. How do we disrupt those legacies of exclusion? And how do we maybe start to think about remaking these areas that we actually have the best chance of living thriving lives together? And that means, really an inclusive civic life, reimagining what a civic life where all voices are heard and have the opportunities to leverage what they're able to bring and contribute, really building a well-being economy rather than building off an adversity economy. So what's the opportunity to really reimagine what a new inclusive economy that is more than kind of the narrow metrics that drive a lot of the work that we do? And how do we really take this moment to really look at our emotional, social, and spiritual lives and tap into these deep cultural opportunities for us to move past the trauma that starts from day one for many to in the intergenerational trauma to really further upstream where we are starting from day one with building that emotional and spiritual and social resilience. So this is really the ethos, if you will, of thriving together. And, one of the things that we've been excited about in shaping this with the WIN Network and many other partners around the country, next slide, please, is that we're starting to see some real momentum. This is not just a theoretical construct. And one of the pieces that's happened in the last couple of months is that the Federal Interagency Group for Long-Term Recovery and Resilience has really adopted this framework and this way of thinking, long-term and short-term, to really drive how they're going to work together across federal agencies, across HUD, across FEMA, across EPA, and even really rethinking what it looks like to partner to support place-based efforts. So we're really encouraged, and we can share more on that. We're going to actually have a webinar coming up, date to be determined, to really hear more about how we might partner differently with the federal assets. We see things like the Building Healthy Places Network, which is a great partner in the WIN Network, and many others that are really looking at this intersection of community development and health. And they've started to map neighborhood investment strategies and priorities around the vital conditions and some of the framework. Of course, the Surgeon General's report that many people in the WIN Network have continued to push forward has really adopted this idea of the vital conditions and how we really think about this intersection of economic prosperity and health differently. And I could add a couple more, the Civic Review and the Renewals, and our private sector friends at the Social Impact Exchange and others are starting to adopt this thriving framework. And the theory of change that Shoma really laid out is ways of really thinking differently around our investments and thinking differently around what those return on renewals are. So we're really encouraged by kind of what's taken on, and would love to invite more and more of you all to participate in this in the coming years. Next slide, please. And I think as we're kind of setting the stage to think about this opportunity in time for a renewal, this was, we're going to hear from Graham, one of Pierce Godwin's colleagues here in a minute, but just this quote that came out of our preparation for the springboard around this kind of unique moment to either fall back and retreat to what's comfortable, or an opportunity to really step out more bravely, really to think about our future in some fresh ways, and to really do that through authentic relationships and building some bridges. And we see a lot of that happening through being in dialogue with one another. The dialogue is indispensable to how we are in relationship to one another, and how we have the courage to act in the face of pretty significant adversity that we collectively face. So on that note, I would love to invite my colleague and friend, Stacy Wegley, maybe to step in and kind of take us through the next session around how we think about dialogue as change strategy.
Thanks so much, Monty and Shoma and Marquez and Louisa and all who have helped set the stage and really begun generating such wonderful and active conversation already in the chat. As we move into sort of this next segment, I'm just absolutely delighted that we are able to have with us today Parisa Parsa from the Local Voices Network, Amir Cannon with We in the World, and Shamso Issack, Living Well Kent, and Graham Bodie with Listen First, as Monty had just mentioned. These folks' work inspire me each and every day, so excited to jump in and hear more from them. One of the things I saw published, and Graham, I believe it came actually through your organization, this week's communications, is that the Public Agenda in USA Today's Hidden Common Ground survey just this last February recently released their findings, noting that across America and across partisan lines, folks see divisiveness as a major problem, and see that divisiveness has really made the, solving and serving in the pandemic, as well as the, acting for these calls for racial justice that much more difficult. Within those findings as well, 79% of Americans did say that they see that creating more opportunities for people to talk with one another whose views and values are different perhaps, but could be effective in helping us overcome this divisiveness. So I'm looking forward to talking more about how we can use dialogue as one of the tools in our toolbox today to work to overcome some of this divisiveness for our thriving and transforming together. You're certainly all living and creating such rich examples every day, and I'd like to jump right in, and knowing that our time is going to go way too quickly for all of you, or is hoping that you might do a little bit of double duty as we step into these first couple of questions. One, introducing yourself and briefly your organization, as we sort of answer a series of sort of initial questions together. And Parisa was hoping you may start for us, share a bit about yourself, and perhaps clarify. We often hear sort of folks using so many phrases: community conversations, focus groups, dialogues, roundtable. What is it that we're talking about when we talk about dialogue, and why have you committed to this practice of dialogue?
Thanks, Stacy. It's a pleasure to be with you all. It's always good to be with this crew because I learn so much every time I hear the great work you're all doing. I'm Parisa Parsa. I'm the CEO of Cortico, which operates the Local Voices Network, an effort to bring technology, innovative technology, into the service of amplifying underheard voices to create a healthier public dialogue. Let's see, I'm going to leave it at that for now. I'll weave in some other pieces of what we do as I answer your question, Stacy. My background is actually in social service work as an ordained minister doing social service extension ministries. And in the last decade or so, I have been in secular nonprofit organizations promoting the practice of dialogue across divisive differences. And now with Cortico, really believing in dialogue as a practice to engage communities, connecting communities to each other, as well as bringing those voices forward into places that they haven't been heard or haven't been heeded sufficiently. So as I talk about dialogue, there are many terms, and one of the challenges in this space is that many people think that, apologies for the knocking behind me if you can hear it, that a lot of folks say, well, dialogue, I know how to talk to people. I've been doing that my whole life. Why do I need to be trained as a facilitator or enter into a new kind of dialogue or structured dialogue? And the practice of dialogue is truly ancient. The practice of sense making in small groups, in communities that are proximate to each other, is definitely something that humans have been doing for a long time and has lent to our ability to survive and thrive through many, many things. And in our contemporary world, we've sort of forgotten some of the basics of our need for each other, our need to connect with each other. And so dialogue is an opportunity. We advocate for facilitated dialogue, but there are lots of practices that provide structures for folks to engage in dialogue differently. It actually invites us to engage complexity, to share our stories in ways that don't make us fit into any pre-existing box or represent any single pre-existing position, but rather create space for curiosity, for engaging discomfort, for staying connected while also engaging in some spirited conversation or debate about issues, with the idea that if we can stay curious about each other, we can learn something new together that we couldn't come up with on our own individually. So there are lots of very, as I mentioned, ancient practices and lots of indigenous practices that have continued through all time and space to do this. But in the landscape, especially of social media, of the economic pressures on people that keep us from connecting with our neighbors as much as we might even want to, dialogue offers kind of a radical possibility for informing policy and practices really from the ground up, and offering folks the opportunity to be seen in their complexity in all of the different ways that policies and practices and sort of the structures of the world as we see it impact them in very different ways based on what their positionality is and their identities. So it's exciting to me because I never feel like I'm going to be at the end of learning from what people have to share in dialogues. And it's been important to me personally because it's been a way for me. I'm Iranian American, my father's Iranian, my mother's American. I was born in Iran, came to the States after the revolution, and Muslim and Christian, and had to live in this sort of bifurcated, you have to choose one kind of world. And the practice of dialogue and what I've learned in dialogue is that we don't have to actually choose. We can bring all of who we are. We can think about the different ways that we're impacted by the different threads of our existence and our practices and our worldview, and bring those into a full new realization. So when I think about renewal too, this is one of the things that I think is exciting. Like if we're hearing everybody's real stories in their complexity, we're going to come up with some really amazing stuff, and that's exciting to me. So that's part of the Local Voices Network, is that we record these community conversations. We work through community partners who are gathering conversations for any number of purposes of their own that are mission aligned for us, of wanting to hear those underheard voices. And what we hear over and over again from folks, in addition to just super juicy stories of really fascinating experiences that folks have, is also this pleasure, this genuine pleasure in, they've signed up for the last year plus Zoom conversations with people they've never met before. And so, you know, already they've taken a risk in joining in and giving an hour and a half of their time to it. But the response we get at the end is people saying, how can we stay in touch? I didn't realize how much I really was going to love telling my story, and how much I was going to love being heard in the complexity of my story, and really thinking together about what could be the future. So that ability to make sense together, to connect with each other, and then also to engage as co-creators of what comes next, is something that folks are telling us about all the time. And I'm really excited to continue to learn with all of our different partners about how we can take those next steps together after an initial dialogue happens.
Thank you for creating some both shared language and really a wonderful segue. As Amir, we lift your voice up here in this space and have the opportunity to learn from the great work that you've been engaging with. Wondering if you'd take a moment to share a bit about who you are, and as Parisa named, what can we learn in dialogue with one another that informs how we might go forward together, and would love to hear more about a bit about what you've noticed or learned in your work with the Equitable Economies Dialogue.
Yes, thank you so much, Stacey and Parisa. I am Amir Cannon, they, them, their pronouns, and I am a social transformation intern with We in the World. And I have been tasked with working with the dialogue centered around equitable economy. I have a deep history and just appreciation for stories, for narratives and dialogues. And that's really integral to how I know I function in my community as a Black trans person, and how sort of we get to a point of not just being at the table, being able to activate policy that affirms our lives and make sure we get to a point of thriving in communities with other people. So that is why I sort of leaned into participating in the dialogues for the equitable economy. And so there's a few things that I have learned just as part of this process is that one, like I recognize now that community has the assets, the tools and know-hows and the lived experiences to create policy. They have all of those items that are integral to how we get to a point of policies, but it's up to us that have these, resources and these opportunities, create meaningful spaces and also bring people and gather people together to share their stories, to share, their narratives and their dialogues. And then from there, we can sort of begin to recognize some of the solutions, the issues, and the proposals that allow us to move to a point of an equitable economy. So with that project, what we have done is we have talked to Indigenous people, we have talked to seniors, we've talked to various amounts of communities, Black women, et cetera, college students that allow us, to see, what are the different intersections that arise out of, these conversations when we bring people together? What are the running themes that say this is what is necessary in an equitable economy? I've also recognized that we have to allow people their full autonomy in these conversations. Yes, they're facilitated, but we are allowing them to speak from their lived experiences, their truths, their realities. That allows them to be able to be honest with us of what's not working and what is working in their community. So that helps me to highlight, and to, uplift, saying this is what this policy says it's doing, but it's not working, and this is what they're saying is working, and this is how we get to a point of, policy making that's actually, taking care of the lives of our community. Another thing that is, we have to be intentional about what we're listening to, why we're listening, and what we're listening for. Sometimes we have the tendency to just listen to the issues, just to focus on what isn't working in our, what's the flaws, what's wrong with our systems, what's wrong in community. But a lot of the people that are mostly affected by inequities also are the most resilient, as Shoma was saying, also have, a vast amount of assets, solutions, and they're doing the organizing that, allows us to get to a point of thriving, allows us access to the vital conditions, allows us to transform our policy. So we have to be intentional about saying, hey, like I'm listening in also to what is working in community. And that's what I want to throw my energy behind to make sure that sustains itself over time. And if we can put a policy lens on that, that's amazing. I think also we have to be connected to community. Sometimes with this work of stories, of dialogues, of narratives, we can often get extractive. We can just sort of take away from community and not engage them, not really embody ourselves in the community and stay connected in genuine relationship with them, and being open, honest, and willing to learn as we go through this process of community dialogues. So one of the things with the Equitable Economy Project is it's not just me taking their stories and translating them into policies and that's the end goal, that's it. No, they're engaged fully across the timeline and the spectrum of this project. They're telling us they're going to be able to look at my work and say, actually, that's not what I meant. This is what I meant instead. This is what's necessary for our community. Or yes, I affirm that, hey, what you have said, that policy, that's exactly what we need. Or I have some insights, I have some wisdom or some innovations and some ideas as to what we can do around policy to get us to a point of an equitable economy. So that work is very, very important, is to keep connected with community and making sure they put the stamp on a project and that on whatever outcome you get from their stories, because that's how we keep our policies, our solutions, our movement, our organizing in a people-centered lens. So that's another big thing. And then I think one of the last things that I find most important is that the conversations never end, and Parissa touched on this, they never stop. They have to keep going, and they have to be intersectional, and they have to have expanse representation, a robust an array of people coming together to talk about, their lived experience, to share with us, their stories. you can't just get like the five most affected people. You got to get as many people into these conversations. That's how we get a diversity of conversations to get to a point where when we make a policy, we're not excluding anybody, but instead people are seeing themselves, in this agenda for an equitable economy. So that means you got to talk to people that are incarcerated, talk to people living with disabilities, talking to indigenous folk, Black, BIPOC youth, Black, Indigenous people of color youth. You got to talk to people with disabilities, experiencing homelessness. The seniors, our elders. You got to talk to LGBTQ folks, especially Black trans women and femmes. You got to do that work. We got to be in conversation with all of these people that are affected by our economy, because they all have their uniqueness, but they're also all saying some of the things that are threaded together. They're showing a theme throughout their stories to say, if this doesn't get included in equitable economy, then I'm going to get left behind again. But if we are purposeful and we're strategic and we're willing to share and genuine about being in conversation with, all the people, then we can ensure what we're doing around an equitable economy. It allows them to have access to well-being, vital conditions, and thriving. So that's sort of what I've learned thus far in my process with the equitable economy. And it's not done, it's not finished. As I said, like, we're continuing our conversations. I have the amazing support of Shoma and We in the World. And I've just seen the power of stories, come to life in this project.
Yeah. Goodness, thank you so much for that, Amir. It was, almost a little bit of taking us to church there, if I might say. It's like looking at the chats and the +1s and the, and the yes and the people centered. And, to your note about, the rich assets, and Shoma's note about the deep resilience, that exist within community, along with the solutions being in community. I'm so excited to get to talk to Shamso today. I feel like, Shamso, that you and I are friends, even though we've not met, just with the rich stories, as you and Monty have had the chance to walk side by side a bit through your work there in Live Well Kent. And I'd love for you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about what role dialogue has been playing in bringing your community members together in relationship and in action.
Thank you, Stacy. Same here. I feel we are friends, and we have been friends. Love to see each other one day in person, hopefully. Yeah, thank you. So my name is Shamso Issack. I am the executive director and the founder of Living Well Kent. I'm originally from Somalia. I've been to this country over 30 years now. I came not very young, but my teenage years. And as a matter of fact, my first home was Boston, so shout out to Boston, Shama and Amir. And so Living Well Kent is a community-led organization, and our focus is creating healthier, equitable, and sustainable community that thrives together. And we found myself and community members in Kent due to, so we are in Washington State, and Seattle area has been gentrified for community of color down to south of Seattle. And we found that our community has been coming down south, but there was not enough resources. And if there's not resources, then our community cannot thrive. So that word of thriving has been something that we thought it still is a lack of accessibility of resources for our community of people of color. Our work has been based on building communities through collaboration, communication, engagement, promotion, education, and advocacy. And the reason that we put advocacy at the end is we first want to make sure that we also, people of color, immigrants and refugees, want to collaborate with other community, because sometimes dialogue, like Barisa said, is important. And in our background, a lot of communities' background is communication and dialogue. But if we're not sitting on the table to make those changes that we need in terms of policies, then we can we can't collaborate if we're not sitting on the table. So we have to be sitting on the table to have that communication. So what comes first is not the communication, it's us being there first. And a lot of times we wait to be invited. So we decided we don't want to be invited because we as well need to thrive like everybody else. So we had to make sure that we educate ourselves, community of color, immigrants and refugees, about policies, about how we want to change those policies, and why we don't wait to be invited. So we have that communication amongst ourselves. Why do we wait to be invited? We need to be there. So we train ourselves to speak when it's hard to speak in a lot of places, and articulate what we want to say, which is hard because a lot of times narratives and stories has been created about us. So we have to, in order for us to recreate that story, we also have to train ourselves and educate ourselves and find out the information before we sit those tables that we need to make changes. So that's why we put advocacy at the end, because first we want to make sure that we collaborate and we communicate, we promote ourselves. Promotion is not like promoting ourselves in advertising, but promoting ourselves, that we want to sit there and have that conversation and educate ourselves. So those are the things. So how we do that is very simple. We share meals together with people that we want to sit and have dialogue with. And we bring our own cultural food, and we bring ourselves into there. So we don't wait to be invited. We bring ourselves with our meals, and we sit together and break bread together, whatever that means. A lot of cultures break bread together, and that's a form of having the dialogue. But before the dialogue, having that communication and sharing bread and sharing meals together. So that's how we bring ourselves, is we bring with our culture, we bring ourselves, we bring our different clothes, we bring our meals together. So after we break the meals and we have food together, then now we're friends. Now people, both sides don't see each other as a threat. They see each other as community, as neighbors, as brothers, as sisters, as sharing recipes, sharing meals. I brought Somali rice everywhere I go. Everybody loves Somali rice because everywhere we go, I'm originally from Somalia, so I bring my rice. And so things like that, very simple things. It doesn't need to be very complicated. Issues that we can change, policies and advocacy, all of that will come later. Because if you bring that up front, that creates division, that creates, I need to take care of myself, because as we know, policies and resources has been only helping one side of America, not the other side. So as soon as we talk about resources, even good people will now feel like they need to defend themselves or their boys or their husbands or their wives. So you don't bring that in front. You bring the meals, you bring yourself, you bring your culture, then you have the dialect, then you start changing policies. So that has been our foundation of how we break the ceiling of division or, not sharing resources or creating stories, because once you share my rice with me, tomorrow I'm not a threat. You might ask me the recipe. So that's how we try to change and thrive together. It has been very successful of what we have been doing in the city of Kent. And we love to duplicate that to other places. We created, one of the things that we have done, and Monty and his group help us, is to do a need assessment in our community. Because sometimes to do that kind of work, you need to first find out about what are the needs in the community. And I love how Amir shared that the community has know-how and the resources and know what changes that need to be done. but nobody asked us how. So after we bring our bread, then we will say, okay, these are the things that we need to be changed. So again, we went back to educating and training ourselves, and we had Monty and his group help us to do a need assessment in Kent, and we find out first time, even though we knew that we live in a food desert area, but a lot of times in a community level, food desert, food insecurity, all of those things are not things that we think about. We just know that we live in a food desert area. We take buses, you know, to go to places to buy food, but we don't name it. We just know, and we're resilient like that. We just live with it. And so the first time that when we did a need assessment, we knew that we live in a food desert area and we need to correct that. So we created a food policy committee that is not only the community. Again, we thought ourselves, if I have in a room 8 people that look like me, eat the same rice as me, what policy can we change? No, we need people that have the power to change things that don't look like us and have the power to change, to come to us so we can together change those policies. So our food policy committee is amongst youth of color, who was trained by us and others about what policy is and how to have these dialogues in a government level. The city government, community level, city government, school district, county level, teachers, parents, all were in our food policy, church reverends, mosque leaders. We pay attention to our religion leaders because they're a big part of the community that a lot of times when we have difficulties, first place we go is church and a mosque because that's how we know to be close to healing ourselves. So we had our food policy council amongst all these different sectors, public and private, come together and talk about policies and what is not working and what is working. So that's how our food policy council has been working for the last 7 years. And now it's more the youth leading the food policy council, more the adults. And our youth have been doing amazing work. We have youth policy council have been meeting with the school district and the police department. It's so hard to have Black youth and police chief together in a room, but we have, because they see each other as community. You know, they write with the police. They drink coffee. I mean, they don't drink coffee, but he invites them for coffee. The mayor comes to, so they know our youth have that dialogue with government level and community level and religious. Sometimes youth and religion leaders are not in the same room. It's kind of hard, but they have been having those conversations that has been difficult. But that's how we break the barriers. Thank you. I could speak all day. I don't.
And we could listen all day for sure. Thank you for, again, setting that table for us. You know, a couple of the threads clearly that are coming through, right, is the ability for participating in dialogue to shift the narrative, to learn with one another and from one another, to allow for lived experience to come forth and create context for sharing power, for creating more equitable policies. And Graham, as we start to turn to you and think about the bridge building that is occurring, we're wondering, what's that looking like at the national level? What does building bridges at the national level look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I answer it with you can't, knowing that that's what we're trying to do. So let me contextualize that a little bit. You know, building bridges starts locally. Is Parisa started us on, you know, talking about the importance of bringing local community members to proverbial tables and not setting those tables. As Living Well Kent, that organization very much resembles, you don't set the table and then invite, you allow people to set the table themselves. So it's not that you can't build bridges at the national level, but solely focusing efforts on national unity without concerted efforts at taking care of local communities and the needs of local communities is bound to fail. So Graham Bodie, I'm a professor of integrated marketing communication at the University of Mississippi. Today I'm representing Listen First Project. I call myself the Chief Listening Officer of Listen First Project because Chief Operating Officer sounds like I operate something. And I see my role in the organization more as someone who links partner organizations together. So what we do is we seek to inspire hope and desire, to transform division and contempt into connection and understanding. We seek to equip Americans with the skills, opportunities, and courage to build bridges across divides. And ultimately, we want to normalize listening to understand, extending grace, and seeking common interest, rather than feeding the toxic polarization and dehumanization that we all are familiar with. And we do this in a collaborative spirit. Our sole purpose of existence is to amplify the efforts of over 300 Listen First Coalition partners into large-scale collective campaigns, innovations, and strategies. Monty referenced one of those campaigns early on when he put Pierce's quote up. So last year, we were planning our third annual National Week of Conversation when COVID disrupted our ability to encourage people to gather together in their local communities in person. And that campaign sustained us for 9 months. We reached 20 million Americans in directly engaging 500,000. And this is all social media related, right? Because of the COVID pandemic. This year, we are organizing our 4th annual National Week of Conversation. This year, it will kick off on June the 12th with an event, a weekend that we are calling America Talks. It's a weekend of connection in the midst of deep division, a national conversation pairing Americans across political and other differences in constructive, one-on-one, face-to-face virtual conversations during that weekend, June 12th and 13th, in a little bit over a month. So we're borrowing this model and the technology from an organization called My Country Talks that has orchestrated over 20 successful events across Europe. Funny story, they were more concerned in 2016 apparently than we were about the deep-seated divisions that were always there, but fanning, but flames being fanned by certain entities. And so their model has been successful. They've engaged hundreds of thousands of Europeans in various events, very much like what we're doing here. And so our goal is 10,000, at least 10,000 people paired in one-on-one conversations, at least 100,000 viewing the live stream on June 12th, and at least 2 million social media reach. And so basically the purpose of this is to serve as the launch again of National Week of Conversation, which is that following week, to introduce a new audience, people who don't know that these organizations exist, that don't know that there is a larger interpersonal bridge building movement afoot, that don't know the WIN network exists, that don't know anything about the concerted efforts that have been going on far longer than Listen First Project has been in existence. Clearly, as Parisa said, we can trace our history way back to indigenous models of dialogue and public deliberation. And so the purpose is to funnel people into opportunities during the week of National Week of Conversation to engage and flex their bridge building muscles as they see fit. Not all models of dialogue and deliberation are going to be a fit for any given individual. And so we try to remain agnostic, but encouraging people to try out these different models in their own communities and their own families. Research shows that at least 65 and perhaps over 100 million Americans have the motivation and the spirit of appreciating our fellow Americans for their different perspectives and convictions, not in spite of them. They're tired of the demonization, the toxic polarization, the distrust, the fear, the contempt that have poisoned our society and our personal relationships. They just don't know what they can do about it. And so our goal is mass scale awareness and collective action toward a brighter future for all. So if this speaks to your organization and you're not already a member, there is no financial obligation, only a spirit of collaboration and collective action. And we welcome organizations from across the political spectrum, across the ideological perspective, as long as you're not affiliated with a political party, as long as you're not, taking money to specifically kind of donate over to the DNC, RNC, or other NC that exists out there. We welcome your opinion, your perspective, and then I'll send you lots of emails inviting you to do lots of things collaboratively, and then you say no, and I say, great, next time I'll call on you again. And so welcome the collaborative spirit, those of you that have that spirit in your organizations, and I welcome you also to participate in the America Talks and the National Week of Conversation as you're able to.
Thanks so much for that, and just the great work that you all are doing to catalyze and create opportunities and pathways of all sorts for folks to come together to have conversations. And as you said, whether that's in one-on-one or small groups like Local Voices Network, or our friends at Living Room Conversations, and take a turn with the panel here for just a moment as we introduce one of the other tools that is now publicly available. CI, through our WIN partnerships with Local Voices Network and Living Room Conversations, have created a dialogue guide specific to civic renewal, and that is available now on thriving.us website. I believe my colleague Elizabeth will drop a chat for where you can locate that in just a moment, and would love for the panel to sort of walk with me, if you will, to share in a bit of this dialogue by answering one of the questions that come up sort of in round two. These dialogue sessions are generally about 90 minutes. They can be lightly facilitated, but require no formal facilitation. That dialogue guide will be able to be downloaded from the thriving.us website for you to be able to host an individual dialogue, or perhaps a series of dialogues in your community. And if you'd rather participate with others, as again, Parisa pointed to, sort of, showing up, not knowing who in the nation may join you, but that opportunity to be curious and learn with and from others. There will be a series of dialogues available nationally for you to just schedule for and to jump into. There are 3 on the calendar at this time, and there's a link to that through Junto, and I believe Elizabeth will share that with us as well. But just to demonstrate a bit, if we can together, sort of as we move into kind of round 2 of what is set up within this Civic Dialogue Guide, one of the things we do is to set the stage a bit by talking, or sort of naming again that shared language. What do we mean as we open up a question? And given that this is on civic renewal, the content is available to share that civic life encompasses the infinite ways that many people connect and contribute to their community and society, from voting in an election, organizing a neighborhood block party, to standing up for a just cause, or supporting arts in the park. And Shamso and others have provided a slew of other examples today. And this conversation is an opportunity to reimagine civic life. So I'd like to invite, I'll offer up 2 questions, and would love to invite each of the panelists to select one of those 2 to perhaps reflect and share on as individuals. And you've got about 2 minutes to do that share, if you would, please. So the 2 questions, one side, I guess, of each, or one coin, 2 questions each side there. When is a time you felt especially engaged in civic life in your community, and what did that look like for you? Or perhaps the other side of that same coin, describe a time in which you felt excluded from your community's civic life, and how has that impacted you? And perhaps we'll work in the same sort of order that we did before. If Brisa, you'd be so kind as to start us off.
Sure. I'm going to go with the first one, the time that I felt very connected with my community's civic life, which happened about 10 years ago as the Occupy movement was getting going. Was invited to offer part of a worship service. There were regular worship services, interfaith, ecumenical worship services. And it was my first interaction with a protest or a demonstration on that scale in a long time. So I had done a lot of community action work that was based on, service or smaller group kind of interactions and advocacy. And it was really magical to experience the ways that folks were forming community in new ways. It was really intergenerational community. My kids were very small at that time, and I brought them both with me. And from that one invitation to participate, started going back weekly and doing all kinds of different things with the community. And that's been sort of a sustaining continued community with the different, different reaches that were part of that effort. So I've stayed connected with several of the individuals and a lot of the community groups that I met through that process, some of which I had worked with before, but never cemented that relationship in quite the same way. So there was something about the intensity and also the intentional inclusion of that community that was created for those couple of months that was really powerful.
Thank you for that. Amir, would you step into one of the questions?
Yes. So often I hop into the question of exclusion, but I'm trying to work from a point of optimism in my life. So I live in Minnesota, and we have the unique opportunity of having 2 Black trans people on our city council in Minneapolis, CVP Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins and Councilmember Philippe Cunningham. And as someone that's sort of been distant from, being able to be who I am fully and authentically, I had the opportunity of working in the city of Minneapolis in the Division of Race and Equity. And I worked on a Stonewall Art History project, which was a space for Black, Indigenous people of color, trans and gender nonconforming people to sort of share their reflections on the Stonewall Uprising, and also and share their visions of an equitable future in the Twin Cities that's affirming to our lives. And I got to collaborate with Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins, and we shared space together. She shared her poetry with us, etc. And from there, we began to just collaborate on a few things. She allowed me to do some research for her office around decriminalization of cannabis and these different, and how it's connected to reparations, and these just different ways of engaging with, our folk in these spaces where we're often excluded. Is as was talked about, they took those tables, they took those seats, they didn't wait to get invited. They educated themselves, they built themselves, and they went after that. And I even shared a space with Councilmember Philippe Cunningham on tenant organizing at one point. So that was amazing. I've been at conferences where we have trans folks saying that they're going to run for office, and just seeing that, and we're seeing that our bandwidth sort of expand on these sort of municipal levels and all the way up to federal levels. So that's been powerful to see, and hopefully that means we get bad policy out and start putting good policy in place that really takes care of our lives. So that's the most inspirational thing that I've basically seen at this point, and that's what keeps me going in my work, and as part of my community. So that's what's been sort of the inclusionary point of a civic life for me.
Thank you for that. The power of saying, that representation, it's setting opening up that space for participation. Love that. And Shamso.
Thank you for asking the question. The time that I felt, and I usually culturally don't say I, so I say we. So if I say we, just forgive me. So the time I felt, or we felt, and we're not included in the society we live in or the community we live in is our youth policy council and us were figuring out what is going on with our school district meals, and a lot of kids of color, immigrant background, shared with us that the meals they eat at the school is not resemble the food that they eat at home. It's so different, and a lot of kids have food restrictions, or communities have food restriction due to maybe a cultural halal, options are not in the school. A lot of vegetable, a lot of community of Punjabi background in our community of Kent. Kids don't even eat at school because, a lot of times the schools don't have veggie options or vegetable or veggie based. So there was a restriction, a lot of kids not eating at school for the 6 hours they in school and just waiting until they come home. And then we asked the question, why can't you bring your own food to school? And it was, again, that different cultures eat different spices. So when you warm your food or the smell of your food, a lot of kids feel like they were bullied, just the smell or the look of the food that they bring home. So our food policy council met with the school district, and we said we would like to, talk about some policy change around foods that was provided to the school district. If we can have some policies about menu change, maybe we can have Friday vegan, we come up with good solutions, let's just call it Friday vegans, that has a tone to it. Let's have maybe 2 options of veggie dishes. And we were, even though we wanted to say, let's have a halal option because a lot of kids eat halal food, but it was very touchy subject. So, but again, even though we didn't say that, just the way I look, wearing scarf on my head and my name sounding Muslim name, a lot of the school district got a lot of calls from the community. And there was a article in the paper and everything. They just took it to the second level that, communities of Muslims in Kent are changing our schools to be Sharia law. I don't even know what Sharia law is. I never lived in a Sharia law, and I'm a Muslim person in my life. And, a lot of countries, Muslim countries don't live in Sharia law. But it was Sharia law is coming to Kent, and it was a campaign against just, 5 people, including 4 youth and myself, was a threat to the community that we bring in Sharia to the school district because we want a veggie option in the school menu, and we want a halal option, to the school menu because everything else is acceptable. Why halal food is not acceptable? Why veggie option is not acceptable in the school district? So that's the time that we felt we're not included, even though we live in this community, but we are looked at threat, and we bring in Sharia to the city and the school district. So the school has to stop our conversation, and it was not good feeling for the youth that go to that school that that they are felt threat in that sense, just bringing healthy food to the school. So it took a while. It took a couple of years. We didn't give up, but we keep talking. And the good thing is the school nutrition folks told us not to tone it down. We thought for a while, should we tone it down? Should I take my scarf off when I go to the school district? What should we? Yeah, I know I shouldn't, but you have those feelings that, should I take off my scarf? Should I not say halal? Should I lose my accent? So all of those things that we try to fit in is what came to our mind. But we have very resilient youth and said, no, we're not going to change you. Miss Shamso, you're still going to wear your scarf, and we will go there and you will talk with your accent, and we will demand to have a veggie option in our school menu. And we want to have a halal, option in our school menu. So it's been 4 years. So the good thing is now, just before COVID, the school was ready to have 2 healthy options in the school menu. And that was going to be implemented until COVID. So it's still on hold, but we will not give up, because the youth told me not to give up and keep going and keep wearing my scarf.
No, that's beautiful. Thank you for that. And a number of comments gathering in the chat as well. Welcome you all to stay on the shared journey there. Graham, wondering if you may step into one of the 2 questions for us.
Yeah, so before I moved north to Mississippi, I lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I was there in July of 2016 when Alton Sterling was murdered by the Baton Rouge Police Department. And for, whatever reason, that particular story, I was in a place in my life where it maybe finally struck me, right? I'm just going to admit, my faults as a person, and I didn't know what to do, right? And I felt like I probably didn't have a place. What was I supposed to say as a white person with all the markers of privilege beside me? What was I supposed to do? We weren't really at that point talking a lot about allyship and white allyship in particular. There weren't as many readily available resources as there are today. You'd kind of have to dig for them. And I had known this stuff on a theoretical level. Look, I'd been to grad school. I have a PhD. I've hung around critical scholars my entire life in the Department of Communication Studies at Louisiana State University, which is well known in the field for its critical and race scholarship in particular. But at the personal level, I don't have that experience, right? I don't have the experience of being pulled over by a police officer for no reason. I don't have the experience of being arrested when I'm doing something wrong. I have the experience of them calling my parents and coming to pick me up in the middle of the night. Like that's right. That's my experience, right? And so I got involved, and so I felt, kind of, I don't know if it was a midpoint between exclusion and inclusion, but I, ran across the work of the Dialogue on Race in Louisiana, that work of that group. And helped to bring them to the church that I was attending, which was as it is in the South, as it is many places, over, white, majority white church. But to bring at least one of those dialogue series there, but then also to get out of my comfort zone and go into the neighborhoods where they were having more of these conversations at places that, frankly, I felt uncomfortable at, and not because I was scared or otherwise but it was just I didn't go there, right? That wasn't my neighborhood. It wasn't my place. And so for me to feel like that's what I needed to do at that moment and so that really did begin my journey of this notion of, I'd studied listening as an academic for a long time, but never really tried to practice the kind of personal element of the process in my own life with anyone other than my family and maybe at my workplace, right? And so that really kind of began my journey to find more organizations and more kind of people. And that's when I stumbled very soon after that on the work of the Listen First project and so anyway, that 2016 moment for me and the work of the Dialogue on Race in Louisiana was kind of my moment to learn to feel comfortable being excluded and being okay with not necessarily always being the person that needed to have the voice, but to sit beside and sometimes behind those individuals that have the personal experience, and to really open my ears and listen to figure out how and in what ways I might help. I don't have a word for that, but to be an ally in the places that I could contribute.
Thank you each for sharing your stories and allowing us the opportunity to learn with and from you there, and super excited to be able to take a few minutes for all of us to walk from this larger group into some smaller spaces to be able to reflect on and exchange your experiences. Again, with those same questions. With the deep, rich conversation that's occurred, we're going to move to having breakouts be somewhere between sort of 10 and 12 minutes. And so perhaps focusing again on selecting either question 1 or question 2. When have you felt a time in which you've been engaged or a time in which you felt excluded? You'll be dropping into some breakout rooms now with the magic of Fanny or another We in the World team member. So thank you and enjoy your conversations.
I just realized it must have been
Love seeing all of the faces come back into the space. And even though we're virtual, I have to say it's almost as if as when you all returned, there was more of a smile. There's more of a leaning in as you all had the chance perhaps to be a little closer, to walk closer to one another sort of in those individual spaces. Wondering if there might be 1 or 2 of you who would be interested in lifting up or sharing some of what was shared or exchanged, and welcome all to drop some notes. What did you learn? What was most meaningful to you about this conversation in the last hour? And as we move from those couple of voices, hand it back over, I will, to Shoma to close us out from the morning session. But is there a voice or 2 that would be up for sharing? What was meaningful or valuable to you? Feel free to unmute yourselves.
Yeah, I'll lean in, Stacy. I was in a group with Gabby and Jennifer, and I think what was apparent to us is that we've all experienced exclusion in a lot of different ways, and so exclusion, there doesn't seem to be an end to how that can potentially show up in sort of civic life. However, I think there was consensus around events, community events being one way in order to sort of include people. And so we talked about just larger community events or small community events that we all participated in. And we saw that as a big catalyst for civic engagement and renewal. And so those are just some ways in which we all felt included.
I love that, Marquez. Thanks for stepping in there. It was similar to our conversation and our breakout, and imagining the theme of sort of the work we do, sort of working next to one another, this sort of centering on the power of food as an experience we all share. Is there someone else who would be willing to lean in with us and share what was meaningful or valuable to you from your conversation?
I can quickly share. I was in a room with Chris Halls, and we right away talked about the what we share rather than what we don't share, and we both shared this. Chris also have been in Africa. The smell of the market that we missed. When you go to a market in different countries, that smell of food and everything, the soil, the nature, and reflecting to when we go to a market here, which is supermarket or Safeway, the smell of bleach and cleanness and disinfected. So, and surprisingly, 2 people from 2 parts of the world coming to a virtual meeting like this and sharing that smell. And she shared with me how she wished to bottle it and just carry it around.
I so love that, right? To be reminded that fragrance is so powerful for activating and reminding us of our experiences, and something else we all share. A quick out of the chat, as Gabby has offered, we also felt bonded over introversion. It was funny that we all found a common place, even though we're all different kinds of people. Thank you for that, Gabby. And thank you to Parisa and Shamso and Amir and Graham for sharing your experience, your stories, and just appreciate everyone's time and just energy in the space together today. And with that, Shoma, hand it back to you to take us toward the next session.
Thank you so much. This has been such a rich morning of listening, of reflecting, and of connecting. And I just, as we think about that transforming from within and transforming together, So much of that is about being in relationship with ourselves and one another, to just, as Shamso so beautifully said, to break bread together, to be in community together, to be known to one another. And on that basis of being known, to know each other's experiences, to hear and understand how the world is operating differently for each of us based on where we are and what it means to be, to come together to change the world in a way that creates the possibility for all of us to thrive together. That's what we'll turn to this afternoon, how we transform or begin to learn how to transform our outcomes, our policies and systems. Who gets to decide what matters? What if others around the country who have been experiencing inequities, what do they have to tell us about what matters? And how do we lean into the opportunity for social and civic and spiritual and economic renewal in this time? So we're going to continue on the theme of renewal and lean into what it means for us to be in relationship, in solidarity, and in seriousness about actually helping to bring our power and privilege and gifts and assets, which all of us have, regardless of where we walk, whether we're a community resident or a federal leader. We all bring gifts to the table. So what does it look like to begin to put our pieces together to create something together? So thank you we created this space in the middle, literally, so people could have the opportunity to have food. If y'all want to stay and eat your food together, by all means do so, but we're gonna feel free to, I need some time. I don't know if you're like me. I need some time off of camera these days to renew my own energy and time. So I'm gonna go off camera and come back in an hour and look forward to being back in community with you. See you all soon.